and we wait for the others as they join in. Formal good morning to everyone. Thank you for joining us this morning. This is our 6th webinar in a series on leadership hosted by Coach Kompass, and we're very happy that you could join us. Coach Kompass is a joint initiative between Hunt Partners and Reflection, and we're focusing on leadership development with a difference. We would like to introduce topics which are pertinent to leadership today. We'd like to introduce you to speakers, which are, the hot buzz topics of the day and the current trends. And I'm going to take one moment to talk to you about a very special program that we have curated called the Leadership Accelerator. It's a program which has been designed for the future CXO, somebody who's being groomed to take on the next level. And it's focusing only on one core skill for leaders, and that is of leadership itself. The program will run for a year. It has 3 parts to it: 4 facilitated capsules, 6 one-on-one coaching sessions, and 12 webinars like this one with international thought leaders from across the world. So the idea is for leaders to get in touch with their own authentic, vulnerable leadership style and be able to practice it with the teams and the systems and the organizations that they're going to impact. We would have a cohort of 20 people who would come from diverse industry. They are on a similar growth path, but they come in from very, very different organizations, and they will be trained with faculty like Paddy Upton, Mette Johansson, Laura Joy on topics such as leading self, leading through change, discovering their own leadership style, and more. So if you're interested, please do get in touch with us separately, and we would be happy to give you more details about the Leadership Accelerator. I'm happy to introduce the topic as well as the speaker today. Marc is joining us from Amsterdam. You will see him on the screen and also see that he's joining us very, very early in the morning. So thank you, Marc, for that. Really appreciate being here. Marc has 25 years of experience as a people leader, as an HR expert, leading global cultural and organizational transformation projects. And he's helped leaders through periods of intense and significant change, such as disruptive competitors, mergers and acquisitions, and turnarounds. He's recently completed his thesis from INSEAD, and his topic for his thesis was on vulnerability in leadership. So that's how Marc is here to talk to us about this very, very relevant topic today on vulnerability in leadership. Very happy to have you again, Marc. And how we will be doing this, Marc will take over now as the speaker. We're requesting everybody to be on mute for about the first 20 minutes, but do place your questions and any comments that you have on the chat box. Marc will take a pause at the 20-minute mark, and we will open up for discussion then. And once again, we will open up for discussion at the 50-minute mark, and questions will be answered at both those times. So I hope that works for everybody, and the chat box is open. Marc, we go over to you, and looking forward.
Excellent, and I'm just setting my timer so that I know around the 20-minute mark. Okay, good morning everybody from my side, or good afternoon on your end of the planet. I'm really thrilled to share the findings of my thesis with you, but more importantly to really understand also your input. So I try to just to confirm, can you see my screen now? Yep, great. So I also hope that despite the fact that this is a webinar, that we can create some kind of dialogue, because at the end, this is a topic that requires discussion rather than a theoretical framework. But I'm going to talk to you today about vulnerability and leadership, my findings from the thesis that I recently finalized. And for me, the most important part about vulnerability within leadership is to safely create meaningful connections. At the end, it's all about connections. But first, let me introduce the organization that I'm part of, BoardLink Executive Consultants International. We are headquartered in Düsseldorf, Germany, and I'm responsible for the markets in the Benelux, which is Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg, which is based in the north of Europe. Hence, me being in Amsterdam, it's a geographically logic place for me to be. We are an executive search firm, and we also do consultancy, very dispersed. We have a great international global reach as well. We work together with Han Partners, for example. So this is the background. This is the organization I'm working for. A little bit about EMC CC. Today it's called Executive Master in Change. I was the last class that did Executive Master in Coaching and Consulting for Change. So you can understand I'm very happy with the name change, because Master in Change is much simpler than Master in Coaching and Consulting for Change, or maybe Consulting and Coaching. I always mix up the two. What was the purpose of the course? Really important to really start to understand yourself. The philosophy is, when you are a consultant, when you bring yourself to the stage, and you give others advice, you also really need to understand who you are, what your biases are, what your defense mechanisms are, what your way of thinking is, so that you can approach your clients and approach your issues with as less judgment as possible. The other one is that we really want to create reflective change agents. It's all about reflection. It's all about always asking the right questions, always having an open mind, and reflect on yourself, reflect on the organization, reflect on your team. We do this by understanding basic drivers. So the background of the course is based on a psychodynamic approach, but very light. So we try to understand the basic drivers of human behaviors, and we try to understand the hidden dynamics within organizations. Let me give you an example of a hidden dynamic. We talk about, for example, about defense mechanisms. You might know that people have defense mechanisms to cope with anxieties and with adverse situations. So one would be denial, for example. You just deny that the issue is there. Organizations have a certain defense mechanism as well. Let me give you an example. I used to work for an NGO, and one of the challenges was decision making. And I've quickly figured out that the defense mechanism within the organization was that every time the decision was needed to be taken, and maybe you recognize this within your own organization as well, a committee was set up. A committee of people to discuss the decision, to make consensus, to create, a project plan, but in reality, to avoid making a core decision. And identifying that dynamic and addressing that dynamic was very helpful for the leadership team to change their own behaviors and to make sure that they understood what they needed to do to take away those kind of defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are a part of us, they're part of an organization, so they're not per se a bad thing, but it's good that you're aware when they're being overused. So that's an example of a hidden dynamic within an organization. So that's a little bit of the background. Now let me go into the thesis. I did a lot of literature research, of course, and I did 8 in-depth personal interviews. As you can see, the nationality spread was quite good. So a couple of people, of course, based in the Netherlands, but also South African and from Guinea. Also, the seniority level was very interesting. Young professionals and very senior global leaders, and a mix between NGO and profit organizations. I keep continuing doing my research. I did a presentation and I got input from 123 students. And actually, I would all like you to take out your mobile phones. So this is the first presentation where you're allowed to look at your phone and maybe start up your QR code reader, because I would like to take a quick moment to ask for your inputs. So on this slide, and if the QR code doesn't work, you can always log into menti.com and put in this code. But there will be, if you read the QR codes, there will be a quick survey, which I would like to spend 1 minute for you to fill in. It's just three definitions of vulnerability. And I will, later in the presentation, live, give you the feedback that you have given me and try to see if there's a congruence between my findings and between your input. So let me give you a couple of seconds to finish this. Great, and I see already some inputs. Yeah, thank you. Do you see my presentation screen still? Yeah, excellent. So I'm looking at another screen, which is technology very savvy. Excellent. I have 6 people already giving feedback. Thank you. Twelve. Excellent. We're going to 18 participants already, so excellent. Thank you very much for your input. And I will come back to this later on in the presentation. And if you still need to do it while I'm presenting, then you're gifted with the capability to multitask. That's excellent. So now let me guide you through how I started and came to the topic of vulnerability. Initially, because of my personal belief, I wanted to do a thesis on the topic of trust. And it's already here, you see, it's how we truly connect with one. And, this word, which I find very amusing, is something that happened to me a couple of times. For me, it's very important when I work with others that I'm trusted. There's 100% correlation between my success and between the fact if I'm trusted or not. If I'm not trusted, I've never been able to achieve my targets. If I've been trusted, most of the time I achieve my targets because of course there's always a capability gap. But trust was a very big topic. I started to research it, and you see this definition, which is a very psychological definition, a psychological state comprising the intention to accept vulnerability based upon positive expectations of the intentions or behavior of another. It's a beautiful quote, but it gives you a bit of an insight how big the topic of trust is. In the meantime, I also saw the TED Talk of Brené Brown about the power of vulnerability. And I'm not sure if all of you have been able to see it, but I would highly recommend to watch that TED Talk. It's very inspiring. And for me, the topic of vulnerability really stuck. And remember, I talked about knowing yourself. Part of the program is real in-depth research of yourself. And I figured out that I was not vulnerable, that I did not show my emotions. And one of the things that really was insightful that Brené talked about was that if you suppress one emotion, you suppress all your emotions. And that was something, in short, that I discovered I did myself. So vulnerability was really something that I explored as a route to express and to acknowledge my emotions, to find myself, to get to know myself. So because I was so enthusiastic about the topic, I decided to choose this as a thesis topic and see how vulnerability fits within the leadership developments. So this is Brené saying it's not a weakness, it's a greatest measure of courage. It's not about winning, it's not about losing, it's about having the courage to show up and to be seen. So it's a very positive, the way Brene Brown presents it, it's a very positive attribute. And I was convinced that when I was going to do the survey and my research, that people would see it in a similar way. Just to go back to a little bit of the literature, when we look at leadership styles like servant leadership, authentic leadership, we talk about vulnerability a lot. So it's always in the new leadership development, in the new leadership styles, you will find definitions and questions about or requests from the leader to behave and to be vulnerable. Even in an article that I found recently in the Harvard Business Review, which says which on a neuroscience level looked at trust. There's these, and I'm not going to go through all the bullets. I recommend you'll get the slides anyway, so you can find this Harvard Business Review. There's a couple of points that are important from a neuroscience perspective to create an environment of trust. So give people discretion in how they do their work, share information, and you see the last bullet is again show vulnerability. So this is a really important part, even from a neuroscientific perspective, that you show vulnerability. So in leadership literature, in the neuroscience, it says vulnerability is important. But when I did my research related to leadership, I could not find a real definition of vulnerability. I could find definitions of vulnerability in science. I could find definitions of vulnerability in health and safety, which was all about risk and all about making sure that you close the gaps between the risk and the actual situation. I could find definitions even within the scientific environment where vulnerability was used in biology, etc., but not really in leadership. So we talk about vulnerability. We think it's an important aspect for the new leadership. We even think from a neuroscientific perspective that vulnerability is important, but then we don't define what it is. So I made an attempt based on the interviews and based on the research that I've done to make a definition of what I perceive vulnerability, what I think vulnerability is. So it is about knowing yourself. It's key that you understand who you are, what your drivers are, what your fears are, what your anxieties are, how you relate to others, what the points are that you can learn about yourself. So know yourself. And then be willing to show to others your true self. So I have shared, even on this webinar, that I was suppressing some emotions. I had some experience from the past that I did not acknowledge and I did not work on. Now, I've become a happier person, and I think a little bit of a better person, if you want to define it in good and bad, by acknowledging the fact that I was suppressing emotions and working on those. I went to a psychologist, for example. I'm very happy to share that because that is part of me. That's my true self. I'm not afraid that you see that part of me. I'm actually quite proud that I can share with others that I'm, despite the fact that I'm almost 50, I'm still on a journey of learning, and I will continue to learn and develop myself. So this is as much as I can share with you on a webinar, of course, the me as the true self that I try to at least show to you. And I think this creates meaningful connections. And remember, this was the subtext of my introduction. It's at the end, vulnerability for me creates meaningful connection. It's fantastic that you know yourself. it's really good that you can show yourself. But as we all know, it's more important, you're more happy if you have people around you and you have connections. So by being yourself with others, I truly believe you can create connections, and not only connections, but also meaningful connections. So this for me is really the power of vulnerability. I have 3 minutes. Yeah, I will share with you first your insights. So if you hold on for 1 second, I need to do some technical challenge work.
And meanwhile, we'll welcome any comments and questions in the chat box. So both thank you for your comment, and anybody else who have a comment or a question, please do post in the chat box, and we will take it up in a few minutes.
Okay. So can you see my screen?
Yes, we can see your screen, Mark. It's not on full screen, but we do see your screen. If it's possible to maybe make it larger.
There we go.
There you go.
So thank you very much. 25 inputs. That's really good. Thank you very much. And now let's all look at this together and see which words are coming out. So I see risk as one of the, and trust as a definition, but also weakness, fear, as something that is fairly present. Acceptance is another word that is being used.
Risk.
Decision making. Yeah, so there's some you see that risk, fear, weakness. That's what I would associate with maybe less positive attributes. Trust is, I think, neutral. You can explain it in many things. Indecisive is also not a very positive word. So if I go quickly through an overall interpretation, vulnerability has some risks associated, some fears, some anxieties. Even in your input, there are very few really positive associations based on this small database, of course, that we've gathered. So it's very interesting. So I'll go back to my presentation, and then we'll might open up for questions. Is that okay?
That's good, Mark. Thank you.
Excellent. So
So we have a few very interesting comments, and I think from Subodh and Rajesh and Vish, what we're hearing is that, you know, the topic of vulnerability itself and the word itself seems to have a connotation which is negative. And of course, it was great to see the diversity of views that was put in over here.
yeah, and it's
everybody. So anybody who would like to speak for a few moments.
Someone is looking very pretty.
You. It's obviously you.
Thank you.
So,
Okay, Mark, I think maybe we can move on and wait for questions afterwards. Sorry, Mark.
I'm unmuted. You can hear me now, huh?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. So thank you for sharing your input. And And this was the input from my research. And again, it was very high level, and you've seen the screen pretty quickly, but these are the associations with vulnerability, much in line with the comments we received. There are risks, if you can see. There is what we call the Achilles heel, which was a Greek god who was shot. He couldn't be beaten, but there was one weak spot. That was his Achilles, and of course, through that spot, he was at the end he was killed. There are fears, and people are they were anxious. So vulnerability, a little aligned, and I don't want to draw too much conclusions on this on the quick word cloud that we've just shared with each other, but it's very similar. Vulnerability is not something automatically positive. I actually found that over half of the respondents, both in the interviews and both on the online interviews, which were 66 people, they associated vulnerability with negativity and anxiety and fears. So that was an interesting observation. I just had seen Brene Brown. I was working on myself. I was really excited. I was like, vulnerability is the key to a happy life, which I think is always the tunnel vision that you have when you're focusing on a thesis. And this was the feedback I got from people. So I was a little bit disappointed and a little bit surprised. But then, okay, this was a given. How can we apply vulnerability still? Because I believe in the power of vulnerability because it creates connections. How can we apply this in the real world? Because at the end, I wanted my thesis to be also practical. And I found out that some leaders use vulnerability as a tactic to create connections. And I'm all in favor of tactics that are genuine. So tactics also maybe have a connotation of something that you influence and a bit negative. But I think a positive tactic is very important. So I saw that effective leaders, and especially those who did not associate vulnerability with fear, use vulnerability to create connections. And again, I got inspired, and this very much made me think, how can I use this combination to apply and to help others, to make sure that I can introduce the topic of vulnerability in a better way, in a more meaningful way, in a way to appreciate those fears and anxieties. So I thought, can I explore the beginning? We have to be I want to be very humble about the management approach. It's a beginning of a management approach. It's definitely not a worked out and very well studied approach. But over time, of course, this will expand. But at the time I was making my thesis, I wanted to make a beginning of a management approach related to vulnerability. You could take away today, and this is what I use and when I help leaders and when I help individuals with being more effective as a leader, because I really think vulnerability is helpful. But we also need to appreciate that people don't automatically behave vulnerable because of these anxieties. So that's why I've introduced the term dosing or phasing in vulnerability. And it's, again, the model is very simple. You start with phase 1, where you create connections and you share with others. And this could be on an individual level, this could be in your team, this could be even in a bigger environment when you have a presentation to all of your staff, for example. But not in most cases, I use this when I'm creating relationships for others, either with their team or one-on-one. So what is a safe part of your vulnerability? So again, I shared that I went to a psychologist. I find that a safe part. Others might not want to share that. So what is safe is something that you define yourself. You share that with others. And then you look at the response. Because also one of the key findings is that people need to deserve your vulnerability. Vulnerability is deserved. It's not something that you give to another without any feedback or without any repercussion. So you share the initial safe part of your vulnerability, and then if the initial connection and the other person values your input and even maybe shares some of their own vulnerability, this is maybe the moment where you should share something that you're a little bit less comfortable with, but you trust the other to appreciate and not take advantage of that vulnerability. That's what I call phase 2. And in this phase, you create deeper connection. When again in that phase, the other person deserves your vulnerability, or the team that you manage deserves that vulnerability, you might want to think to show all of you. So the true self, as you remember from my definition. And when you're in that phase, I believe you create really the most effective connection. And that will truly create a better team, a better relationship with your team, or even, I think, at home with your partner or with your friends. That's at least been my experience. And you can see that even in phase 2, there are deeper connections. So I appreciate a lot that in some political environments, especially within work, you don't always want to show everything about you, all your weaknesses, all the things that you doubt about. But it's absolutely fine to say to somebody, you've assigned me to this project. I'm not sure if I have the capabilities to do it. Can we find another way or somebody else to support me? And I think at the end, those kind of vulnerabilities are helpful and for the effectiveness also of your own performance. So, just a summary of my insights. The notion of vulnerability is used too lightly. In leadership literature, everybody talks about be vulnerable, show vulnerability, but 50% of the audience goes, oh, I don't want to do that because it's scary. So it's not that you just apply vulnerability that you will become a great leader. It is not appreciated how it impacts deeper emotional level and creates anxiety rather than energy. So to overcome this, we can help others to dose to the display of vulnerability. So that's the key insight from my thesis. And then I, of course, have a hope. I am convinced that by showing vulnerability, when genuinely and sincerely done, is a good way to create better teams and better relationships. If you, by knowing yourself and showing one's true self to others, can create more meaningful connections at work, also, I believe the work environment could be a better place. If you look at the engagement levels today within the work environment, it's actually quite scary. And there's a lot of people showing up at work, but are they all showing up for the right reasons? And I think we can challenge ourselves. I challenge myself when I'm a leader. I want to be aware that when my team comes to work, they come to work because they choose to do so, because they go to a happy place, because they go to a safe environment, because they know that where they work, they can basically share whatever they feel comfortable sharing. Of course, we want to achieve targets. Of course, we have goals. But it doesn't mean that those goals are more important than the team dynamics that I want to create. And I firmly believe that when we focus on connections, when we focus on showing our true self, the whole working area, the environment around you will also be a better place. Which then sometimes means that you have to do things differently. It creates complexity because it's much easier to achieve a number, but it's a false security in my view, because achieving those numbers via punishment, via repercussions, via reward is something that we've all learned to do. But creating these numbers because people are really thinking that those numbers are important and that growth is important. By intrinsic motivation is something that is much more difficult, but I think at the end, much more sustainable and much more powerful. So I'm really convinced, and I will live it my whole life, that if you create these connections, if you know your own strengths, if you know the things that other people are better at, if you're willing to share your doubts, your concerns, without, of course, becoming, paralyzing, but you have to make sure that other people know who you are. I'm pretty sure that the environment is a better place. And I want to finish with this slide. And it's true, I think we can solve engineering problems. We can fly people to the moon. At a certain point in time, we'll fly people to Mars. We need to solve a big economical crisis. We need to solve a big environmental crisis. All those things we will do, either via working together or via technology. But I believe, and it was already identified very, very early, sorry that we're talking about before Christ, this is my timeline. So, over 2,500 years ago, the most difficult thing in life is to know yourself. And I'm really happy that I've put myself up for the challenge to get to know myself as much as I can. And hopefully with this talk, I've tried to inspire you as well to understand yourself a little bit better. Because at the end, the more you know yourself, the more you can show yourself, and the more you create. So this is the end of my presentation.
So we have some interesting, comments coming in, and I'm going to pick up a few. Subodh has written in about what do you think is the difference between vulnerability and trust?
Excellent. Yeah, Kompass, in my view, it's a big. So let me, if you allow me, I go to the definition of trust. Sorry, I don't want to make you all. So actually, trust is deeper than connections. It's looking at intentions and behaviors. So vulnerability is the beginning or the essence of trust. You can't trust each other but without showing yourself. But vulnerability, in a way, is a one-way street. I decide to show my vulnerability. You decide to accept it. What it then creates is a mutual understanding, which then I would call trust. By not showing vulnerability, but also by keeping my commitments, by making sure that whenever you need me, I'll be there. So more than just showing, oh, look at me, I know myself, and here are my strengths and weaknesses. I think trust also has the component of action in it. So that might be a good way of seeing the difference.
So I'm just writing to everybody. You can unmute yourself at any time to ask the question yourself. So please do feel free. Hi. So we have a question on what is the downside of being vulnerable from Vish? And
yeah,
I think this would be a question on everybody's mind.
Yeah, no, and I quickly alluded to it, but I think this is a very good point. And when I coach other people, I also really look at the environment that they work in. So it very much depends on the environment that you work in. So and this is something that I think is a societal issue and an issue where I strongly believe we need to change the way we work. In a typical capitalistic model where shareholder value is the #1 measurement and we achieve all our targets at the expense of whatever, normally the environment is not as healthy and as productive as you would like to believe, and is what I think is important. So you have toxic environments where in those toxic environments people are looking for you to fail. I always advise people to change that toxicity or leave, but okay, you don't always have the choice to leave. That's also the reality. In those environments, I will not coach somebody to show all their vulnerabilities, because you know that there is in your leadership team, in the executive team, in the board of directors, always one or two people that will later on use your vulnerability and use it against you. So therefore, I fully appreciate that people see vulnerability, which it is. It's a risk. It's a risk. So I am on a bigger mission to change this environment, to make sure that we have people around us that have a collective view on what they want to achieve, a positive collective view, that we don't look at the return only, that we look at the impact we have on society, the impact we have on people, the impact we have on the environment. If you create a team around you of people that think the collective good is more important than their own individual achievement, that creates an environment where vulnerability is productive. As long as we keep narcissistic leaders, people that have their own agenda, people that always will use others to, and we reward these people, by the way. That's important. Many of you are in positions, and I'm pretty sure you have rewarded people who behaved the way you would like them, but they have achieved results. If we define, it's not about improving the bottom line by 10% only. Of course, you need to improve the bottom line. But you say, we do it in a sustainable way. We do it in a way that helps others. So then you measure with that level. I'm pretty sure back on some of the rewards you've given, you maybe don't want to give them today. But it's up to us to change that. It's not something that a thesis like this will change. It's really, how do we create a better workplace, which I think is also more sustainable. I go to work because I have fun. I like what I'm doing. And this is why I think I can keep working for the rest of my life. How many people live to their retirement? They just survive year by year, achieve their targets, keep their head down when there's a reorganization, make sure that there's people around them. They use, we all do this mapping of the people around us and see, is this an enemy or is this a friend? Why? I ask. And of course I understand. We should not accept automatically anymore the status quo of there's only one target and we achieve that target at all expense. So
we have two very interesting questions being posted here, Marc.
Yeah, thank you.
One on, is there a downside of not being vulnerable? At least for us, is there a downside of not being vulnerable?
Yeah, you don't help, you don't create connections. That's the simple thing. You're misunderstanding yourself. It's a missed opportunity, but hey, people can live with that. But you don't connect to people. So you're very lonely. And there is a Harvard study, by the way, which shows about longevity in life. And the key thing about longevity in life is connections.
That's a really lovely study. Over 80 years, they tracked people and they studied their productivity and their happiness. And they found it's basically about connections, isn't it?
Yeah.
And from Ajay Kelkar, question on how men have culturally asked or taught to.
I think this is excellent. There is definitely a gender issue. I read a quote. Perel, who is and I can't remember the exact quote, but Esther Perel is a very famous relationship therapist. And she actually says, I don't use the word vulnerability with men. And I forgot the other words he used. Apology. So I'll find the quote and I'll put it in my presentation. But it's a really good example of a very famous global relationship therapist who by on purpose avoids using the word vulnerability, because men are not supposed to be vulnerable. I try to focus a little. I've been to India 4 or 5 times. I've spent a little bit of time there. I have some friends here, but of course very limited knowledge. So apologies if I'm being not respectful to your culture. But I assume in your culture there's a strong hierarchy. There's a strong patriarchal approach. And of course, then as a man, you wanna show that you're tough. You wanna show that you can handle everything. You don't want to say I have doubts. You want to take care of your family. You want to take care of the family name. You have prideness that you want to portray. So yes, there's definitely something in our upbringing and something in our sociological context that doesn't help men to show vulnerability. Yeah, unfortunately, most researchers also in this aspect are female.
Yeah. Well, it's a great point and a big gap then in our, ability to make connections with one gender, which has a very different, how do I say, different coaching up to this point. So we're really working against the grain of what's been done so far.
Yeah.
And we have a question now from Rajiv asking that how does it connect to more public figures, like political figures or mass leaders, who have even more of a public persona?
Yeah, wow, what a fabulous question and a very philosophical reality. I mean, there is something weird in our makeup as human beings. We intellectually understand that we need to help each other and that we need to be vulnerable. I think the thesis and the research, there's intellectually everybody understands it, but then still we love power. We love people that love us. We love that somebody says, I'm going to solve all the problems in the world for you. And I frankly don't understand those dynamics. I think there's part of us, our reptilian brain, that drives. We are not rational as people. That's one of the learnings also from my recent studies. We are 90% of the time driven in an irrational way, and then we explain it and become rational. And I think this appeal of world leaders to be strong and to say to everybody, don't worry, I'll fix all your problems. Everybody knows it's not true, but still we feel this is what they need to say. I think a political leader who shows vulnerability and will say, I'm just gonna, please elect me and I will try really hard for the next 4 years. It's not a good story. So, but I think to show more of themselves, so you either have the archetypes, and we're not going to mention this name because I'm not going to name in the world. Really no vulnerability whatsoever, but there are in the business world now who understand that vulnerability is effective. So in the political world, maybe a little bit more steps to be taken. I see it around me already in the complex world of business, where big CEOs have stood up and said, I know myself. I don't know everything. I'm going to make sure that I have people around that support me. I think that will be a big step if we get used to those kind of figures to behave in such a way. The politics will follow. But I'm honestly very, very confused with politics. So.
Sanjay, please, over to you. You had a comment on,
Thank you, Mark. I think great insights. I just wanted to share, in Cisco, we've been talking about this for almost last 4 years. Obviously, till the time we didn't make it part of leadership agenda and part of the culture, it had varied impact. But 2 years back, we have our cultural values. We call them trust, transparency, and intimacy. So it became a charter. And I mean, in leadership journey here, I feel that this is an awesome tool. As long as you you make it as a culture. So, for example, when we look at people and kind of rate their performance, we never look at weaknesses anymore. I've been in business for many years. I mean, it was always, when you had that meeting with your leader or manager, I mean, you knew he was going to talk about 10 weaknesses, and it was a very scary experience. And I think last 2 years, we just talk about strengths, and it's okay to open up and say, this is something I'm not good at. And we've seen really good results coming out. We're still early in the day, but for those participants on this call, I mean, we're seeing amazing results. It helps to improve the environment. It helps results. I think we have gone down to metrics and see, is it improving performance? So I just wanted to share that. And the reason I came into this was I was really very keen to understand external wave of this, because I thought we had people trying to put this as a leadership tool. But great to hear that your research has come up with the same, at least not the outcome, same insights.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
Yeah, and it's lovely to hear how it's actually worked over a few years in a large organization. It probably gives, because it's already showing us within our small group how many positive and negative connotations came up when we use the word vulnerability. So it's great to see that you find success with it after implementing it.
And I think it's excellent. I do measure against all the original negative way of assessing people. Of course, in the ideal world, you talk about also that the things that people can improve. I do fully appreciate that now you need to say, okay, we only talk about strength, but at a certain, I hope that when we talk about performance and we talk about people, we say we're going to look at your true self.
Yeah. Culture. Then I am, as an individual working with this organization, I will bring it to I will be vulnerable and say these are for certain areas I'm not good at. Don't put me on a task where this is the strength I need to apply. It's not my strength. And so, I mean, we've seen people changing jobs. You wouldn't imagine, for example, it's a pretty unique case. We had a lawyer here, he was working with the legal stuff, moved into business development because he felt his education was not in alignment with who he was as a person. So he shifted and he's doing pretty well in business development.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you.
It's also matching up with Upendra's comment earlier that, vulnerability needs to be supported by factors, economic factors, the physical factors, the social factors, the political factors, and of course within an organization, the culture of the organization. And to Amitabh's comment, that comes in as one.
I agree.
Right. So we're in the last 2-3 minutes of our time. Any maybe one last comment or question? You could either chat in or you could unmute yourself and have a question asked.
Yeah, I'm Rajesh. So not a question, but thank you very much. Such an important aspect about your, psychology and never knew that you can use it to help your team and being a better leader. So a nice insight. So I'll brood on this.
Thank you.
So just going to take the moment to thank everybody for being part of the discussion, and to Marc, it's been very interesting to see the journey, and we've talked about how we came in with very, very different words associated with vulnerability. But I think we leave the webinar with things to do and things to ponder about. And Sanjay's example of a real life large organization like Cisco actually implementing and finding change and opportunity from it has been really wonderful. Marc, we wish you a lot of luck with your research, and we would like to keep in touch, maybe with the participants in this group. We will be sharing, of course, the slides that you have, put up for this, and also Brené Brown's link for the TED Talk, which Marc recommends for all of us to have a go at. Thanks very much, Marc. It was wonderful to have this discussion, actually.
Yeah, and thank you very much. It's difficult to get feedback from a screen, so I hope people really enjoyed the presentation. But I can just see that for the first time since a while, there's sunshine out there. So maybe that's a sign. So I hope the sunshine is hitting us all. And I'm more deprived of sun than you are, I appreciate. So,
I lived in Sweden for 18 years. I exactly know what you're talking about.
Oh my God. That's even darker. It's even dark. But but seriously, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed it, and please reach out to me. I mean, you can find my contact details in the announcement, and I'm on LinkedIn. So I'm very happy to connect with you. If you've got more questions, please feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you. Thank you very much for organizing.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for being online. Have a lovely day. Thanks, Rajesh. Good to have you.
My pleasure. Very thoughtful.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Joba, thank you for your comment. Rosette, hi. Thanks for your comment.